common obstacles to listening, right? We already know that to be a great coach, we really need to listen. Right? Listening is the ultimate skill. But what are some of the common obstacles to listening? And so here are some, and I'm going to go over them. And when you identify one that is a big challenge for you, or that could be a challenge for you as you're coaching, if you like, please share in the chat so I can speak to it a little bit more. So the first one is being judgmental. We all have it. We all judge. Naturally, we all judge. We listen to gain support for the negative images that we already have, right? We think we have an idea in our minds already of this person is crazy when they're thinking like, what are they really? Like it's already there. Like we all have this judgment. It's really like one of our main saboteurs in our minds, and it's a defense, it's a survival mechanism, quite honestly, it's what it is. And so being able to identify it, right, and all of this is just so that you can identify in yourself what could come up when you're coaching someone else. Like I may judge, so I'm going to make sure that I'm going to take my judge and sit it all the way in the back of the bus, right? And I'm going to put empathy in the front and open-mindedness and presence. And I'm really going to listen to what this person is actually saying. We all do these things. This is not, I'm not free from it. You know, I practice every single day. And these are all reflexive mechanisms in all of us. So, why I'm sharing this is just so that you can be aware and you can really and you can push this, like place this in the space that it needs to be in your brain when you're doing your coaching sessions or when you're having, a consequential conversation with someone. The other thing that we do a lot of is rehearsing, right? Rehearsing when you actively create an argument against the speaker's point of view as it is being presented. So as the person is speaking, you're not really listening. Like you're literally thinking in your mind of like, when this person is done, I'm gonna tell them about themselves and I'm gonna let them know that is not right. Like instead of right in this in everything that the remedy, right, to all of these things is open-ended questions, right? Coming from a place of empathy and curiosity. Mind reading, right? As women, today actually, Milagros gave me a very good example of mind reading, right? When you may disregard what the speaker is saying and try to surmise what they really mean. Like if a person is saying, instead of checking to see what it is that they really mean by that, you just assume, right? And put them in a bucket and say, I know what they mean. Yeah, of course. Right? How many times do we do this with our friends? Like we do this with our friends a lot. Like, yes, I know exactly what you're trying to say. Yes, that's right. So in coaching, right? And obviously you're not going to be coaching your friends, but when you're coaching, just because you want to agree with someone doesn't mean, that you're being effective. Right? Effectiveness is not free, right? It takes work. So let's just not do this. Let's not just assume that we know what they mean. Let's ask clarifying questions. The next one is advising, right? And so giving advice is a beautiful thing. When the person asks for advice, what happens is that instead of us just listening, what you do is that you make yourself, sometimes you just give advice for there's many reasons, right? For one is to feel needed, or the other one is just to distance yourself from the speaker's true feelings instead of really listening, right? It's like, really? We do that? Yeah, sometimes we do. We just like, let me just solve this problem really quick and get it over with. But in coaching, right? Again, if someone's asking you for advice, you always want to give the question back to them as much as possible. Let them do their own thinking. Lastly, these last three: pleasing, filtering, and deflecting. Right? With pleasing, where you're so concerned about being so nice that you don't like you'll you will interrupt to say yes, I understand, when you don't really understand, to agree with the person. um but it really is really preventing you from doing the deep listening work, where you're listening to what they're saying, paraphrasing it back to them, checking for understanding, all for the purposes of, again, mirroring their thinking back to the person. It's not, and everything that I'm saying to you, it does not come natural. This is work. The filtering piece, right, is around when we hear something that the speaker is saying, but we don't hear everything, especially some of the things that are harder for us to hear. So when we're paraphrasing, we omit a lot of what the speaker said. So, like, for example, I've done this exercise with corporate managers, and one of the employees is saying, like, sometimes I feel like I'm not getting the same amount of support as my white peers. And I'll get the manager, rephrasing back saying, oh, so you feel like you're not getting equal amounts of support? And it's like, no, you filtered that. They said they're not getting the same amount of help as their white peers. So this is just one example, right? And so why we do this is because sometimes what is being said is uncomfortable, right? But it's not really our job to judge. Like, you don't want to repeat back, let's say, like, I don't repeat back swears, or like disrespectful language. But I, get into the habit of saying it plain, repeat back to the person what they said and check for understanding, right? And that's one way to make sure you're not filtering. It's to paraphrase plainly what you heard the person say. Lastly, deflecting, right? When you're redirecting by changing the subject or telling a joke when a topic is uncomfortable for you. Like, we're human beings, we are not superhumans, as coaches, but this stuff is going to come up. We're going to want to deflect, we're going to want to judge, we're going to want to please. And so, in order for you to be effective, right, and to be the kind of coach that is respected, that is going to make a difference, you got to be aware of these things in yourself, so that you can really hold people to the highest standards possible, right? You're mirroring to your clients, um, the clarity in thinking that you want them to achieve. So I want to stop here and ask if there's any of this triggered anything in you, or which one of these, you can just put it in the chat, you feel is going to be the most difficult for you, or the one that you have to really keep in mind when you engage, in your coaching capacity. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty, Natasha. I appreciate it. Yeah. We do this. The reason why we do this is because many of us don't get, like, they don't teach us communication skills at school. Like, they teach us how to read and write, but not interpersonal communication. Yeah. Mind reading and pleasing, right? And advising. Yep. And pleasing. Yeah. Yeah. So all of them. Yeah. So a really good kind of, how do we get to the root of not doing these things, right? Is called mindfulness practices. because essentially when we do these things, what we're doing is almost like rushing through the conversation. We're rushing through the interaction. And so when we can place some type of mindfulness practice in our lives, we give ourselves this exercise of like putting a pause in things that we're doing. Like we can go from one thing to the other with pauses and come from a place of thoughtfulness and response as opposed to reaction, right? Like definitely keeping all of these things in mind, making sure that like I'm not going to do these things. Um, but essentially, like if you want to get to the root of it, is having some kind of a mindfulness practice so that you're not rushing through the conversations. And always remembering like what is the intent of this conversation? What is it like, one, for your client? What is the goal? What do we want to achieve today? Right? And as a leader, is thinking like, what do I want to influence today? What is the outcome that I'm attempting to influence? And so when you do that, right, you can be, you know, that in order for lasting change to happen, it comes through truly influencing the other person to almost to make the decision that you want them to make by themselves, because you influence that. So you don't want to, if you judge, you're going to limit the possibilities. If you're rehearsing, you're limiting the possibilities because you really don't know. Like maybe we rehearse because we're afraid and we want to be in control, right? But the possibilities are so much bigger than what we think we can have. Yeah, so all of these are, survival mechanisms. We're rushing through things. So just making sure that the intent is clear.
I have it.
What's your question, Magalis?
My question is when we're trying to lecture somebody, that could be an obstacle. You know what I mean? Like I see a lot of people that they just want to lecturing somebody else and they don't listen. Just that could be an obstacle or what it is.
Yes, lecturing falls in the category of advising.
Okay.
Like I'm telling you, telling you, telling you. Right. And so what that does, right, is instead of just listening, right, you make yourself feel like you're the important one, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
the one who knows it all. And you're
Mm-hmm.
distancing yourself from the speaker's true feelings, because at the end of the day, right, people, like, you want to get people's, if you're trying to influence change in someone, you need to get their consent, right? Like they have to feel that they want to make this change. And the way we do that is by having them feel heard and empathizing, with, like, I get your concern. You may not agree with it, but you acknowledge it so that they know that you are listening to them. Because if you don't acknowledge that you're listening, they're going to expend so much energy trying to get you to understand them. It's hard work. I'm not telling you it's easy. It's work, but it works. It's effective. Does that make sense, Magalis? You're muted.
Interesting the question because sometimes when we have to do like a meeting with a lot of people, we always find somebody like that they try to stop off from speaking and they try to just lecturing, you know what I mean, the speakers. So
Yeah.
that is an issue.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm,
there is something called the art of graceful interruption,
uh-huh.
where you say, "Oh, I," like, if you're the leader of the meeting, right? If you're leading the meeting, you can ask for interruption ahead of time. I mean, you can ask for forgiveness ahead of time for the fact that you're going to interrupt, and then you just do it like very gracefully. And I know it's hard. It's hard when someone goes into a story, but sometimes you have to do it because if a person just goes on and on, they're taking up valuable time
No.
and it's not meeting the goal.
Mhm.
But someone has to take the lead.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments that they would like to make before we take a break?